come up in the discussion. Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you. So I would like to ask the other panelists to give an initial pitch about challenges in cybercrime and or digital forensics. So can we start with David Wall, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, great. Yes. So I've been doing some research into ransomware as a modern cybercrime, which is really at the other end of the spectrum to what Julia was talking about. These are all part and parcel of the same technologies, but in impact in very different ways. So I'm going to start with my conclusions, really, and then sort of work backwards, because I'm then going to address a few issues which have arisen that need to be discussed. So I'm doing research for the EPSRC. We had a project on ransomware in which we, it was quite a big project involving Kent and DMU and Coventry University and Leeds and Newcastle. And I mean, since then, it's sort of blended into another project I'm doing on cybercrime in the cloud, because a lot of the victims in the ransomware project actually were cloud providers. And so we're taking the research forward through that vehicle. But the conclusion is that there's been great changes in ransomware in in cybercrime in the past 5 years, which I'll summarize. So ransomware, I use an example as a modern cybercrime. But my own research into, for instance, the structure of DDoS stressors also complements this. And it's clear that cybercrime offenders are now much more professional than they used to be. For instance, when the original cyber security strategy was released, you know, there's been a change. What I'm finding is, or what we're finding is that these offenders are not working from an organized crime playbook. They're working from a business studies manual. But in so doing, they're more ruthless. And getting more ruthless, they're attacking organizations instead of individuals because of the increased yield, but also the neutralization that they get. That, you know, they feel that this is just an organization is being hit rather than victims. And they're stealing data. Data is now the central part of the attack. And they're naming and shaming the victims publicly on websites. And whilst the attack is going on, some of them are instituting denial of service attacks on the victims to increase the pain. So, you know, the cybercrime offenders are not just more professional, but they're actually a lot more ruthless. Interestingly, the way they present themselves as business people dealing with clients, in other words, the victims who have made unfortunate decisions about cybersecurity. And you see this over and over again in some of their transcripts, because they are playing the publicity game. What is underlying all this is the increased yield in the proceeds of crime, cybercrime, is causing effectively skilled potential actors to choose cybercrime as a career. And it's not just as an offender, because offenders today are now supported by a much broader cybercrime ecosystem, which facilitates cybercrime. And I'm talking about sort of the provision of cybercrime as a service, or ransomware as a service. Data markets where you can buy data. And you know, a lot of these are channeled through the dark web markets. A lot of which get taken down, but a lot of which stay up, and so on. There's about 6 key groups, and this is the new face of organized crime, in my view. Each of these services tend to be run by brokers. They broker information, and they tend to be run by kingpins, the people who tend to run those operations. And the key thing here is, within a cybercrime, a modern cybercrime like ransomware is very complicated, with a lot of key actors and individuals. there's not necessarily one Mr. or Mrs. Big. And the recent Klopp ransomware arrests show this. It was proclaimed that the Klopp actors were arrested, but it wasn't the case. They got the bit players, the monetizers, so they only disrupted operations. So modern cybercrime, modern organized cybercrime is distributed, a bit like the network. It's networked. It repairs itself when it's damaged and disrupted. It repairs itself, and this is problematic in actually how you get rid of and resolving it. The offenders are incredibly adaptive, but by and large, cybersecurity and law enforcement tend to be rule-based and occupational culture-based and relatively inflexible in comparison. And there's still elements of reassurance policing where there's a difference between the demands for security and what the police and government and cybersecurity industry can actually provide. There's a lot of information in there, but just a few of the key issues that have arisen are, the law regarding to ransomware as a modern cybercrime is quite complex, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, but there are a few principles here which I can address. The laws regarding to ransomware fall under different bodies. Ransomware tends to fall under different bodies of law. The computer misuse, for instance, and the extortion, and a range of other laws. For instance, money laundering and laws, etc. The other problem is that with ransomware, it's very underreported, although some offenders are now publishing the victims' names, which is slightly contradictory. It's under-prosecuted because of this, because there's little court, which means also that there's little court experience across the criminal justice system of dealing with cases like ransomware. Our system in the UK tends to push it all towards the major offence for resource reasons. And policing ransomware becomes problematic when the victims and the offenders are in different jurisdictions. And we see this with the Blackboard case, for instance, which stole data from up to 1,000 university alumni. And ransomware is also global. It may be big globally, but it's also small locally, which it impacts locally. And because of the way it's structured, local police get little experience of dealing with ransomware. Although what I have found is the UK ROCU model seems to be quite successful in connecting local and national police regionally, and it seems to be fairly well regarded by police and industry, that's just a feeling from the research that we've done.
David?
The problem with ransomware now is it's moving away from just being a computer misuse, a technical offense. It's moving more and more into social engineering, and individual workers, often in senior positions, are being targeted and compromised, and that's the way they get into the organization. But then they move laterally along through it, and there are lots
David?
Yes.
I have to interrupt you a little bit because we need to the others, so we can move to the others. Is that okay? So I need to interrupt you because we need to move on to the other speakers as well. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Apologies for rabbiting on.
It's very interesting, and we just have to go do the round and then come back to the Q&A. Okay, so I would like to ask Chris to provide his view on challenges of cybercrime and digital forensics. Chris?
Yeah, no problem at all. My perspective is slightly different to some of the other panelists. Very kind of practical. I run a digital forensics unit that covers 2 police forces, Kent and Essex, And the majority of the work that we do relates to child sexual exploitation. It's not to say that we don't get cybercrime jobs and other types of crime, but obviously our main focus, if we're looking at ways to improve or to speed up or increase the yield that we get from something, the biggest hit that we get is from that area of the business. But there are common themes that run through them all. One of the big challenges that we face are new software and services. So new platforms, things like Zoom. During lockdown, Zoom rocketed in the number of users, and as such, it then became a platform for other forms of criminality. Well, we had to react to that and learn what we need to look for when examining a computer that has been seized in relation to one of those crimes. And this brings us on to an issue that, you know, academia can help us with very much, is research and development. The issue that we have is there are so many new software and services coming out on a daily basis that we can't do the R&D on them. And if we did, what would happen is a large proportion of those probably would never actually become, you know, one of the mainstream applications that we would start seeing used. So we are very much in a position where we have to wait to do our R&D until such times we have something seized or submitted to us, or we get intelligence about something, and then we start our R&D. So law enforcement are very much playing catch up on the sort of rate of change for technology, the internet, and to a degree society. That's one of the biggest ones we have. David's touched on a couple of other points. He touched upon the distributed nature of criminality, the organized criminality that you have today, and that distribution is very much a problem, particularly when you look at the internet society as a borderless society. And that's one of its biggest strengths, is that, you know, you have this engagement with an almost endless platform of people. If you want some information, you're not limited to going to, you know, back in my day, sorry, going to your local library to look it up, or finding a local organization that knew something about it. Invariably, you don't even have to ask the question, because that question has been asked 1,000 times before. You just have to Google it to find the answer. But similarly, that borderlessness, if that is a word, presents a problem for law enforcement, because you have different legislations in different regions, you have different arrangements between countries. So there are, you know, these organized criminals will set up in countries knowing that that country does not have a reciprocal arrangement with, say, the UK, and then they will target people in the UK knowing that law enforcement do not have that relationship between those two countries. And it is a very, very big problem. And all of this leads to something, again, David, stealing my thunder, touched upon again, is he touched on it from a different perspective. He spoke about how the criminals are naming and shaming these companies. Well, it's that naming and shaming, that companies not wishing this information to get out, that they have been compromised, because it affects shareholder confidence, it affects also customer confidence. If you've got a bank that's been subject of a major cyber attack, you might consider moving your money somewhere else. So the knock-on effect of that is a lack of reporting. So large organizations, it's not an instant reaction, right, we'll report this to the police. They will actually sit down and consider the pros and cons of reporting it to the police. And ultimately, the police are more likely to identify and prosecute offenders, but that isn't necessarily what the company themselves primarily are interested in. In the case of ransomware, they're interested in getting their data back. They aren't necessarily interested in the prosecution of the offenders. They want their data back. And that has a knock-on effect, which, to reference David yet again, is the lack of experience of law enforcement. The less people report this new, you know, ransomware or any new emerging criminality, the less experience we have, the less experience our cybercrime team. And every UK force now has a cybercrime team specialising in this. And one of the things they do a lot of is trying to raise business confidence in their ability to assist them when an incident like this happens. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. People don't report it, so the police don't have experience of it in investigating it, which means business is less confident in the police's response to it, which results in a lack of reporting yet again. So those are some of the issues that we have. I mean, the biggest one really, you know, I've been in digital forensics since 1993, and this has been an issue since day one, and it will probably continue to be an issue, and that is the volume of data. The volume of data increases year on year. It's a fairly straight curve that we have to deal with, and it's for a number of reasons. One of them is something called Crider's law, which is very similar to a law called Moore's law to do with the increase in power of processors. And that states that disk drive density, or essentially their volume, will double every 13 months. Luckily, from a digital forensics point of view, this has slowed down over recent years as the disk manufacturers are sort of hitting the brick wall, which is the laws of physics. But still, we're seeing larger and larger hard drives in home computers, business computers, everywhere. That is compounded by the pervasiveness of technology in our society today. So, whereas in 1993 we might go out on a warrant and there may or there may not be a computer in the premises, these days when they execute a warrant, it's how many computers, how many laptops are there going to be, how many desktops, how many tablets, how many other storage devices, USB sticks, memory cards. You know, your mobile phone is far more powerful than the computers that I used to examine back in 1993 and has many times more storage. New and novel devices add to this. So as every week goes by, there are new devices out there that people are interacting with. You know, the smart device market is very big at the moment. Smart speakers, smart TVs, smart watches. All of those are adding to the volume of data that we have to process. Between Kent and Essex, we have over 2 petabytes of storage for processing cases, and it's constantly full. We have a constant battle to make room for new cases coming in the door. And that's before you start looking at things like games consoles. Games consoles, from a child sexual abuse point of view, is one of the common places where the groomers will operate.
Chris,
yes.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Is that so? We need to move on to the next?
No problem at all.
Next speaker, okay?
No worries.
We come back with Q&A. So the next speaker, I would like to ask her to give a pitch is Budi, Arief.
Okay, thanks, Virginia. I'll try to stick with my 5 minutes. And David already talked about ransomware. This is a project that we work on until end of 2019. And John also highlighted the importance of ransomware, so I don't need to repeat too much on that. But what I want to highlight here is the challenges that are facing the shift of the way ransomware has changed in the past few years. Ransomware as a service is one of the biggest threats, and the business model is pretty profitable. So a lot of people a lot of criminals do want to take it as their new business. So what can we recommend here? So I think what we should do is never pay. Don't pay the ransom demand, because first of all, there is no guarantee that you will get your data back, or they will not leak your data if you pay. And second of all, if you pay, you actually make the cyber criminals ecosystem flourishing. So they embolden in their criminal activities, and they just do more attack because they get rich, they get paid. And so that's what I would like to suggest as something that we should, avoid to pay. Now, what can we do to avoid becoming a victim or avoiding to pay? So first of all, you need to exercise basic security hygiene. Among others, make sure you do back up your data. Okay, so if your data is back up it securely so that you can put it offline, so it's not always online. then if somehow you get compromised and your computer is affected by ransomware, you still have your data, so you don't have to pay on that regard. And second, which is also very important, is not to get ransomware to your system in the first place. So don't click on malicious links or suspicious links that come through email or on various websites. Just be careful on that. As David also suggested, that the threat has shifted towards exfiltration of data and leaking to shame you. So another way you can protect yourself is to encrypt your data, to make sure that you have control upon your own encryption. So encryption is a very powerful technique here that is abused by this hacker, but you can also use it for your own good, so to protect your data, so that if somehow someone managed to get into your system, your data is encrypted, so it doesn't make any sense to the attacker, so they cannot reveal it to the general public. And the third, and for now, the final option I would say you need to do is make sure your system is up to date. Patch your software. It's possible that I've heard of cases that a ransomware operator, take ransom of a particular company, they pay, and then they got infected again within 2 weeks, and they have to pay again. So this is because they didn't solve the problem, which is the security issue in the system. So make sure you patch. I think I'll stop there. I hope I'm not blabbering too much, but we can always have a more Q&A discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to remind people that they can raise questions on the Q&A with the Q&A option. So please do so. And then we are going to go back to this when we finish this first round. So I would like to call for Henseler to provide his view on challenges of cybercrime and digital forensics and all digital forensics, please.
Thank you, Virginia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for also the other panelists, and definitely I'm a bit similar position maybe as Chris, not in the operational law enforcement, but within the Netherlands Forensic Institute, and within my field of research, where I would say it's not uncommon to have more than a petabyte of evidence, and it's something that's continuously growing. So there's really an explosion of digital evidence, not only in the volume, but also in the types of evidence. So I completely agree with Chris's call, I would say, to the academics, that there is a role for them to help us solve this challenge of how can we cope with all the different formats and types of information in our digital forensic investigations. I also have another view. Maybe it's good to explain that one of the things the Netherlands Forensic Institute has been involved is the development of a new paradigm, which is called digital forensics as a service. It's quite common, I would say, already in e-discovery space, where we have law firms that are investigating and doing document review. In forensics, digital forensics, that requires a kind of different type of tools. So it's not as far as advanced as we have in the e-discovery space. But digital forensics as a service basically has the same promise. You can do digital forensic investigations through a web browser, but it also has a centralized big data storage facility. The system we've developed is called Hansken, but there are more systems like it. And there's two things I think that are important that can help us address the challenge. I think one of them is the community that we want to establish, not only within law enforcement. We now have 12 different law enforcement agencies in several European countries that are using Hansken, so we can collaborate, we can share solutions to these systems. But the other one is that we are also looking at artificial intelligence. So once, as the volume of data is growing, we should be looking at artificial intelligence. And I know there are already, digital forensic tool vendors are using AI to classify images, pictures. For that, this could be in indecent cases, child abuse cases, but it's also, if you talk about terrorism, if you're looking for pictures of firearms, or drug smuggling, you're looking for pictures maybe of sea containers. That's already very well developed. But there's lots of more new AI coming, I think, in our research community. One of the problems, of course, where we're struggling with is how do we find patterns? How do we connect the dots between many different evidence sources? And this is where AI can also help us with data visualization, with network analysis. We have deep learning algorithms that are doing unexpectedly very well on big data sets. But then again, AI also will bring us new challenges. So how do we address, can we still explain, what the computer found? So the explainability of AI is definitely something that's considered a challenge. Personally, I am a big believer in intelligent assistance. So I think we should look at AI as a way to enhance our investigators, to make them use AI as a tool, but that they can still make their own judgment. So I think that's a good way to use AI for relevance ranking, focusing and drawing the attention of the investigators to things that are different in the data that probably should be looked at. And I think I'm based in the Netherlands. I think the UK has some interesting work going on in the Transforming Forensics program. Last year in July 2020, there was an interesting report published on the digital forensic science strategy of the UK, where the challenges were named, the complexity, the volume, and the integrity or the legitimacy of the data. I recommend everybody that's in this field, they should take a look at that document. I think it points out very well the challenges. We haven't solved them yet, but I think with digital forensics as a service, with taking advantage of the large collections of data and working together as a community, sharing experiences, I'm afraid that's not something that can only be solved by one particular commercial company that's providing a tool, regardless of the amount of people they are putting at work. I think it's definitely something that we should look at, especially in Europe, where we can combine our researchers and see how they can make our tools smarter.
Okay.
And push the work also to the non-technical investigators.
Thank you. Thank you, Hans. Thank you. So I would like to just invite Julia Davidson, if you have any comments to add in terms of challenges, Julia. Kind of 1 minute, something kind of quick. Would you like to comment?
Thanks,
Add your
Virginia.
view?
Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you.
I'll be quick because I know I've had a lot of time before, but just to pick up on a few threads I think that are interesting. So the idea of the community raising the child, I think is the village raising the child is really important. The idea of the multidisciplinary approach as well is something we always use in our research, and increasingly so. I think this is really an area that no one discipline should focus on in isolation. And just to say, very interested to hear about David's research as well, and cybercrime as a business. And I'm working in a very different area of cybercrime. We're focusing at the moment on youth pathways into cybercrime, and we're not really seeing that in our research. But I think it's a very different population, and perhaps it's something we'll see in future. So I'd be very interested to have another conversation with you, David, at some point. But yeah, thanks for the insights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a question from the audience. Actually, it's kind of a multi-part question for different people. So the question is, so Russia recently promised to cooperate with the US in arresting cybercrime criminals within its territory. So what is your view? Will this have any practical impact for reducing ransomware attacks? So this is one part of the question. So David or Budi, who would like to answer this?
Sure, David, you can start.
Thanks, Budi. Well, it's a really interesting one because this is part of the bigger game. I mean, a lot of the discussion we have is that where the rubber hits the road on how ransomware actually works, what's happening. But this is part of a bigger game, the sort of bigger framework of intelligence, political politics, and I mean, America's asked Russia to extradite, and Putin has said, they will if America will extradite, and it's part of this bigger game. I am not sure how this will evolve, if it will ever evolve. And it's interesting, actually, in the talks, I was just checking recent attacks, and I see one from Russia, which is quite unusual. So someone is now attacking Russia. It's not just the Russians attacking everybody else. So I wonder whether that's going to develop more. Okay. The fact is, I don't really know. I'm not sure. I mean, John W5 may know, but I don't circulate in those circles. So it's really hard. Yeah, Budi.
Thank you. Thanks.
To add something, Budi.
Yeah, thanks for starting that, David. So, so one of the biggest attack recently is the Colonial Pipeline, which was operated by a ransomware as a service gang called DarkSide. And what is interesting there is the US Department of Justice actually came down hard on them, in a sense, trying to recover. So one way to do this, I know it's still a big challenge, is to make it hurt for the cyber criminals, so money. The case with the Colonial Pipeline attack is, from what I read in the news, the Department of Justice managed to channel the half or more than half of the ransom payment that was made. I think it's about 4.4 or 4.5 million US dollars back to them, so that the cyber criminals lost the profits a little bit. It's still quite a lot of money that they made. So being able to hurt them, hurt the cyber criminals where it matters, so reduce their profitability, that probably will help towards reducing the threats. Sorry, go on, okay. Virginia.
Okay, so thank you. So let's go to the next part of the question. So what are the specific transborder law enforcement cooperation pitfalls and solutions with authoritarian countries? Chris or Hans, who would like to take on this? Chris, maybe?
Sorry, struggling to find the unmute button then. The issue with the whole transborder cooperation, one, there needs to be something put in place in the first place, a very, very complicated piece of, political documentation. There needs to be certain criteria that need to be met. So, we can't go to another country and ask for their assistance in a case that doesn't meet a certain threshold. Normally, it's that there needs to be an equivalent crime on their legislative books. So if we have a crime over here on our books that they don't, well, we can't do anything about that. The other big problem is speed. There's been a lot of stuff done over the last probably decade or so to have some fast reactions for this, but there is still a political process you have to go through. You still have to fill out paperwork, you still have to submit it, it still has to be transmitted to the other country's embassy, and then you await a response. So any fast response stuff, and if you're talking about things like ransomware attacks, these things can be set up and shut down very, very quickly, and moving on very, very quickly. The other issue with the borderless kind of side of things is, in the old days of investigating frauds and things like that, you followed the money. You follow the money. You find the criminal. You find the linchpin. You find whoever. These days with cryptocurrency, it's very, very difficult to follow the money, and the legislation isn't there to support that. If there is such a thing as legislation that could support that, I'm not sure there is.
Okay, thank you. Right. So the next question we have.
Virginia, maybe
Yes?
I can add one more thing about the exchange of different jurisdictions is the development of a standard to actually express evidence in a way that it can be communicated with other jurisdictions and other tools. This is the case standard. It's an ontology-based standard for describing digital evidence from cyber investigations, from digital investigations, so that you can actually exchange that with other people. And if you have a case which is going across borders, at least you have one way of describing all of your evidence. Just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So we have another question on the Q&A, which is not paying after ransomware attacks an easy choice? Which are the choices? So a few points on the precise choices would be nice to have. Maybe, yeah, so this has to do with maybe cyber insurance. So do you want to take this, Budi?
Sure. It's very challenging. Whether to pay or not to pay is a very complex question to answer. Of course, we try to suggest for everyone not to pay, but in some cases it's not possible. The cost of recovery, for example, is just too much that they might lose their business if they didn't pay. There is a paper by one of our colleagues here, Julio, which look into the economics of ransomware with some other colleagues who currently are Coventry now and DMU. But what is important is to be able to say that if we pay, you don't have to, you have to make sure that, I already mentioned it earlier, you make sure that your system is properly patched so that you don't become a victim twice, okay? It's a very complex question. I would say don't pay, but of course, you have to be ready before that. If you have backup, if you have encryption, everything in place, then it makes it a lot easier for you not to pay.
I really agree with Budi. The problem here is that there's a total clash between the public and the private interests. So, when an organization, and some of the ones I've been looking at, have been the experience of small cities, for instance, having their administration attacked by ransomware. They just want to get back online as quickly as possible. Similarly with the larger organizations, particularly there's been a shift recently towards multiple service providers and cloud providers. So these organizations have possibly thousands of clients who are also affected by this. So they want to be online now. They don't want to, they need systems back up running. And the other side of the negotiations of payment is it's become institutionalized. So you not only have what the offenders called ransomware consultants who they employ, but the cyber insurance companies employ negotiators to work on their behalf. So the ransomware consultants on behalf of the offenders get together with the negotiators and work out a solution as quickly as possible. They want to be back online. I recommend that people read the paper that Julio and colleagues, as was at Kent, wrote. It's very, 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 very good. And it shows how it's in the attacker's interests to make sure that their own software works. Because if it doesn't decrypt, then word will get round. And as Budi says, it's an extremely complex debate. So just to say to pay or not to pay sort of actually detracts from the immediacy of the problem and trying to resolve it. And it does sort of interface with the bigger political picture. Right, I'll shut up.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, if I may add quickly, I just remember there's something that I want to highlight. Is there's an initiative called No More Ransom, which is actually initiated by the Dutch police, and Europol. No More Ransom tries to provide the key for decryption the files that have been encrypted by ransomware. So there are some helps out there that can make the victims able to recover their data if possible. So there are software companies, McAfee or MCSoft, quite a few others. They do develop various tools to decrypt without having to pay. And also an interesting development is some of the ransomware operators decided to pack it in. They decided to stop before they got arrested. And some of them actually released the keys. So that's good. So if your system got encrypted now, maybe make sure you keep an eye, and that ransomware might actually call it a day, and the key for your decryption might actually be available for free in the future. Sorry, just added something. Thanks.
Okay, so I don't think we are going to have time to go through all the questions that I posed. So I would like to have a final question, if I may, for a quick kind of wrap up and answer from different panelists. So how can we increase the agility of responding to cybercrime and to better protect our citizens? So can you, each one of you, have a quick word about this? So can we start with David?
Yeah, interesting that 25 years ago, I remember having a discussion with some Home Office people, how they were going to develop tiger teams, which are interdisciplinary groups of people from different sectors to work together to be very adaptive, to get in to systems and into hacker groups and break them apart very, very quickly. And as far as I know, that idea was never materialized, because it's one thing to say that sort of thing, it's another thing to do it. I mean, people have to, the problem is data and knowledge and sharing the different sectors information together, so they co-own the problem, which is ransomware, and they work together to co-produce the solution, which is very easy to say but hard to put into practice.
Okay, Chris, do you have any final words about this?
It's a very tricky one due to the ever-changing nature of it, but you almost need a inter-country force. In a very similar way, we work very effectively. Kent and Essex are a collaborative force because we have a lot of shared criminality. The criminals go across the borders, and they don't respect borders. They don't stay in Essex, and Kent criminals don't stay in Kent, and that works very effectively. So having some form of force who could act across countries would be very useful. It would be a virtually impossible political task, I would imagine, to actually create such a thing. But hey, that is one answer.
Thank you. Do you have any, Hans and Julia?
Yep, I think that what we should do, there's no such thing as 100% security. Yeah? So you have to be prepared for when they get into your system. So I think monitoring, detection is still very important. It's going to be staying very important. And AI, artificial intelligence, pattern recognition is probably going to help us detect breaches in a very early stage. And the earlier you detect them, the better you can prepare and handle. So that would be my recommendation.
Virginia, can I comment from the research perspective? I think one of the issues that was raised by our colleagues at EC3 a few years ago, which prompted the Youth Pathways research, is that research is so often behind cybercrime because it's such a fast-paced area, and that actually academic research struggles to keep up with the fast-paced nature of cybercrime. And so I think we as academics need to find a way to conduct research that still is of the same quality, but is much more responsive, because a study that takes 3 years may not be particularly useful when there's a pressing need for solutions, a pressing policy or practice needs. So we almost need academic first responders here in this space.
Thank you.
Yes, and if I may add on that, and to continue from Hans' point of view as well about prevention or detection, it is indeed very important to make sure that we are prepared. Some of the research work that we do at the University of Kent with some colleagues around the country and some PhD students we have here include how we can detect ransomware happening in the system before it does too much damage. So we have some PhD work on that. We also look into how or what kind of future threats may happen with ransomware. So we look at other technology that could be affected by this, including Internet of Things. Imagine these, nowadays people have got all sorts of connected devices at home. If these devices got compromised by ransomware, that could be a lot of, bad consequences. So we want to see how we can prevent that first of all, and see if we can recover. And another thing that we are also looking into is early work in the PhD work in this is to understand the stakeholders more, the victims, the cybercrime operators, and helping the law enforcement agencies to create systems that can be useful for them. So this is some examples of ongoing research we currently do here at Kent. Thank you.
Thank you.